Greetings all, I'm Aaron Mills, and welcome back to Look Up on the Screen, a retrospective of Superman in cinema. Last time we looked at the first live-action appearance of the Man of Steel in the 1948 Superman serial produced by Columbia. It was, as expected, a massive hit. And so, proving that there really is nothing new under the sun, producer Sam Katzman went and did what any Hollywood producer in his position would do. He made another one. Adam vs. Superman was shot in 1949 for a release in 1950, but it was not without some small problems. Kirk Alyn, who returned as Superman and Clark Kent, was not happy that he didn't get on-screen credit, as national periodicals insisted that Superman be credited as himself, so kids could continue to believe in him as a real person to whatever degree they liked, much like Santa Claus. As compensation, Alyn was paid $10 grand for appearing in Adam vs. Superman. Naturally, being the cheapskate he was, Katzman initially balked, but realized Alyn was well liked as Superman, and was also willing to make public appearances in costume, and that could translate to more butts in seats. He also wouldn't have to waste time wading through a bunch of low-grade Hollywood hopefuls to recast the role. Supposedly, during the auditions for the first Superman serial, one aspiring actor decided to start tearing up the seats in a Los Angeles theater to prove how qualified he was for the role. In comparison to the original, Adam vs. Superman is considerably better. There's more action, more interesting plot developments, and an actual supervillain.
I see you received my birthday gift.
Who are you? The Adam Man?
A better question would be, where are you?
No, not him. Well, not exactly. Because Adam vs. Superman is the first film appearance of Superman's greatest enemy, Lex Luthor. Well, more accurately, just Luthor. The Lex name wouldn't become part of the Superman canon until the 1960s. Luthor in this case is played by Lyle Talbot, a character actor who had been in several supporting roles in a variety of pictures, including as Commissioner Gordon in the 1949 serial of Batman and Robin. The plot is a little more disjointed than the first serial. It begins with Superman capturing Luthor and sending him to prison. However, the joke's on him, because Luthor has invented some sort of teleportation ray that allows him to teleport himself and his henchmen anywhere they want. This is done through a special coin that Luthor and his lackeys carry with them. This enables Luthor to have a reliable alibi while his gang runs rampant. To this end, Luthor creates a new identity, the Atom Man, a black-clad mastermind with a glittery Easter Island helmet. Oh, that isn't a spoiler, by the way. While the serial initially tries to put up the idea that Luthor and Adam Man are two separate people, about halfway through they just kind of abandon that conceit, at least as far as keeping the audience in the dark about it. What follows is not so much a single plotline as a bunch of plotlines strung one right after the other. Luthor is paroled and becomes the head of a local TV station, using the TV cameras to case locations targeted for robberies and other crimes, occasionally appearing as Adam Man to the other characters in the story. As the serial continues, he creates synthetic kryptonite to ward off Superman, which eventually loses power. He then uses his new invention, the main arc, to banish Superman to the Empty Doom. Exactly what the Empty Doom is unclear. Luthor claims it scatters the target's atoms into space, but mostly what it seems to do is to turn Superman into a ghost until he gets Lois and Jimmy to trick Luthor into setting him free. After this, Luthor does everything from launch flying saucers at Metropolis to creating unnatural earthquakes, to finally deciding to launch himself and his goons and Lois into space and wreak havoc on the world from his rocket, before Superman finally captures him and returns him to prison. Or rather, he gets turned over to Perry White and then goes back to prison, because as we established last time, in this universe, the Daily Planet is also a law enforcement agency. Again, this isn't a terribly deep cinematic outing for Superman, but it is better than the last one. The acting is still pretty solid, there's a lot more action, more money was clearly spent this go-round on sets and effects. We even get some live-action footage of Kirk Alyn flying. Such verisimilitude! But really the standout in Adam vs. Superman is Lyle Talbot as Luthor. At this point in Hollywood history, serials were kind of on their last legs, and as a result, the acting in them kind of tended to be However, Lyle Talbot's Luthor is absolutely perfect. He adds a gravitas to the role that you don't usually see in serials. He is calm, collected, and coldly intellectual. Even when Superman foils his plans, he doesn't really seem to get angry, he just switches tracks to his next plan. It isn't until the end of the story that he starts truly getting unhinged, to the point that even his own men thinks he's starting to lose it.
Cops are outside and Superman's with them.
Send out a shockwave.
It's suicide at such close range. He'll collapse the cave.
Do as I tell you. Foster, man the controls.
We'll be buried alive.
You haven't the spine of a jellyfish.
Talbot's performance in Adam Man vs. Superman enhances its quality greatly. A superhero is only as much fun to watch as the villain that he faces, and pretty much in 1950, Superman didn't have a lot of villains that could match him in the way that Luthor could. Lex Luthor debuted in Action Comics 23. Back then, Luthor was essentially a mad scientist who had a number of schemes designed to either make him money or eventually conquer the universe. Interestingly enough, the common image we have of Luthor today is actually the result of an artist's mistake in the Superman newspaper strip. No one is quite sure which character the artist confused Luthor for, but originally, Luthor appeared with a full head of red hair. After the strip depicted him as bald, the look stuck from that moment forward. Throughout the gold and silver ages of comics, Luthor would eventually rise to prominence as Superman's archenemy. Now, his reasons for hating Superman have been largely fluid, given the constant continuity reboots, overhauls, streamlinings, and everything else that goes with standard comic book nonsense these days. In fact, Luthor disappeared from the pages of Superman comics in 1946 and wouldn't be seen again until 1957 in the pages of Superboy, a spin-off series created by Superman creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, which hypothesized a younger Superman who was in full possession of his powers and doing good while growing up in Smallville. In the story, Superboy meets Amazing Man. A bald man in a fantastic costume arrives in Smallville, calling himself Amazing Man and helping the populace. Superboy figures out that Amazing Man is only setting himself up as a hero in order to rob a bank, and as Amazing Man sits in jail, he warns Superboy that he will regret capturing him as sure as his name is Luthor. This story would eventually be ignored in 1960 when the Superboy mythos was altered to indicate that Superboy and the now fully named Lex Luthor grew up in Smallville and were friends until a fire broke out in Luthor's lab, which Superboy put out with his super breath, accidentally dousing Lex with chemicals that cause him to go bald instantly. The concept of Luthor and Superman growing up together in Smallville is one that would be frequently adopted and discarded over the years in the comics. Luthor would largely remain a mad scientist throughout the 60s and 70s, with a couple of exceptions that we'll talk about in other episodes. But by and large, he continued to create scientific schemes that would bedevil the Man of Steel in all sorts of Superman media, whether it was leading the Legion of Doom on episodes of Super Friends, to capturing Superman and torturing him to try to get the secret of his peanut butter. No, seriously.
Lex Luthor has Superman trapped. He's using kryptonite to destroy his powers.
Now you'll tell me why Superman peanut butter tastes so great. Never. So fresh roasted, so creamy, so yummy. Then its secret will be mine, all mine. Yay! Foiled again! Just wait, Superman. I'll find out.
Superman peanut butter. Its strength is its great taste.
In 1985, DC Comics published Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was an attempt to clean up the confusing continuity of various DC titles. Following the events of Crisis, comic writer John Byrne wrote a new origin for Superman in 1986. The revamped version of the mythos changed Luthor from a mad scientist to a corporate mastermind. Still brilliant, still an inventor, but one that now had an entire corporate empire's worth of resources to move his schemes forward, as well as a new motivation for despising Superman. But again, we'll talk about that version of Luthor in another episode. Luthor the Mad Scientist is a classic take on the character, and Adam Man vs. Superman takes advantage of it wholeheartedly. Each of Luthor's plans has some fantastic scientific rationale that in no way resembles actual science, causing all sorts of delightfully silly mishaps. But Lyle Talbot's performance keeps Luthor himself grounded, as Talbot is able to say the most ludicrous nonsense the script offers with a perfectly straight face. Indeed, Talbot's Luthor is actually quite charming. In a subplot where Lois is allegedly fired from the Daily Planet, she goes to work at Luthor's TV station, and he seems delighted that she's working for him. Aside from when they fail, Luthor doesn't really berate his henchmen and is more than happy to explain how his inventions work. As far as his relationship with Superman goes, this particular version of Luthor doesn't really seem to see Superman as anything but yet another obstacle in the way of achieving his goals. He's very dispassionate about Superman, convinced that his intellect is always going to win out over the Man of Steel's strength, which has always been the best part of Lex Luthor. He is quite clearly smarter than Superman, but his own ego and nature are what's always going to prove that Superman is a better man than he'll ever be. Adam Man vs. Superman is a fun, engaging serial that embraces the late Golden Age, early Silver Age goofiness of the comics wholeheartedly, but it's Lyle Talbot's Luthor that elevates it to something truly special in the history of Superman in film. For his first live-action appearance, Lex Luthor could not have had a better debut, thus displaying to thousands of moviegoers that there is a reason he will always remain the greatest of Superman's foes. However, while Adam Man vs. Superman was a success, the serial format itself was on its last legs. With television becoming widespread across the country, going to a theater to see weekly installments of a story was considerably less appealing when you could stay at home and watch episodic entertainment for free. Katzman toyed with a third serial, but ultimately decided against it. And as for Kirk Alyn, well, there's been a long-standing superstition that anyone who plays a live-action Superman is doomed in one way or another. Kirk Alyn appears to be the first victim of the so-called Superman curse. Following the serials, he found it increasingly hard to get work, blaming Katzman for pigeonholing him as Superman. Katzman made it up to him by offering him a role in a new serial based on the comics character Blackhawk, a daring pilot who had been part of successful propaganda movements during World War II. The Blackhawk serial debuted in 1952 and was one of the last comics-based serials ever made. Television had apparently won the war for episodic content, and as such, it was only a matter of time before somebody tried to bring Superman to the small screen. But the producers of this hypothetical TV show did have a backup plan just in case their idea didn't get picked up for series, and that's what we're going to look at next time, as George Reeves steps into the role of Superman for the first time in Superman and the Mole Men. I'm Aaron Mills, reminding you to look up on the screen.